Hi lovelies, my name is Krishana and welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking all things birth and essentially how to pick your birth team, which is very important to having a successful birth and postpartum process as well as prenatal process. Your birth team really makes or breaks your entire experience. So I'm a mom of two. I have a 3-year-old as well as a newborn, and I've had had an in-hospital birth as well as a home birth, natural and medicated. So I really run the gamut of basically seeing all the types of things that you can see as far as our birth team. And so I'm here to give you the skinny, the lowdown, so you don't have to be searching on Google forever. You don't have to get in all the Facebook groups that I got on. You don't have to watch 50 million YouTube videos. This will be your one-stop shop to all things home birth. So number one, you need a health provider. And so typically this health provider is usually what people are familiar with as an OBGYN. So, traditionally this is a person that you go to tell them you're pregnant, they do the tests, you have ultrasounds, labs, all those things. And usually that OBGYN or someone from their practice will be the person who is with you at labor at the hospital, and then you do your postpartum checkup care with them. Here's the gag with the OBGYN. Usually, most people choose their OBGYN because they love that person. That's the person they want to deliver their baby. But the likelihood of that person delivering your baby is slim to none because most OBGYNs operate in a practice setting, which means there might be anywhere from 3 to 5 to 10 OBGYNs who work at a practice, and any of those people could actually be the person on call the day that your water breaks and that you go into labor to deliver your baby. And so unless you are planning to have a scheduled C-section and you schedule it with the OBGYN of your choice that you love, you can get anybody. You don't get to choose any of your nurses. Basically, when you show up to the hospital, who you get is who you get. And I think that that's a very stressful experience, especially for first-time moms. And so I think it's so important for people to have the autonomy to choose their birth team. So here are what some options can look like if you don't want to go the traditional OBGYN route. So your replacement for your OBGYN can typically be a midwife, and there's many different types of midwives. So we're going to run through briefly with the different types, and then I'm going to tell you like the ones that I've used and why I think they are great alternatives to a traditional OBGYN. So number one, there's a certified nurse midwife, and these are people who have gone to nursing school specifically for midwifery and usually either work in hospital settings or they sometimes, depending on the state, can also do home births. So in the state of Georgia, certified nurse midwives actually do not do home births based on like legislation that's been passed. So you're not going to be able to get a certified nurse midwife in Georgia. However, you might find a OBGYN practice that also has midwives there, or let's say you go to a birth center or you go to a really good hospital that has midwives there. That would be how you would have a certified nurse midwife in hospital. Then there's also certified professional midwives. So these people have also gone through a certification process to become midwives, but they aren't nurses. So their certified nurse midwife can basically operate like a OBGYN, do all of the things that an OBGYN can do, administer medication, write prescriptions, all of those things. Your certified professional midwife is a little bit different. They can't. So they've gone through the full training, but because of the way these systems are set up and legalese, they technically can't administer any drugs to you or write prescriptions, etc. Most certified professional midwives operate outside of the hospital setting. Sometimes they work at birth centers, but typically outside of the traditional hospital setting, and usually they are doing your home births. And then you have traditional midwives, also known as granny midwives, and many of those end up being naturopathic doctors. And so I've had a traditional midwife, and I really love them. For most people who don't have any signs of health issues or aren't high risk, can probably actually have a home birth with a traditional midwife. Traditional midwives are starting to be completely pushed out of the system. They're also aging and getting older. And when they don't have anyone to pass down their learnings to, those learnings are starting to be eradicated from the larger space. And so most of your naturopathic granny midwives are going to be the people who are giving you different herbs that you can take and tinctures and tonics and really more holistic ways to do preventative care versus what they do in hospitals, which is more care for, once you've already had an issue, they're just dealing with it on the back end. And then There's also some people who decide to not go any of those routes and they free birth at home, so they don't have a healthcare provider with them. And these, you usually find this with people who are maybe on their third or fourth birth. They've done this before, they've done this rodeo, maybe this is their third home birth or their fourth home birth, they're not high risk at all, and they're just deciding to do it on their own. So those are kind of your options. So I have experienced both a certified professional midwife as well as a traditional naturopathic granny midwife. So I had a certified professional midwife for my first birth, and I was planning a home birth then, and I ended up having some complications and was being dual tracked with the OBGYN and ended up having birth in a hospital. And so my certified professional midwife came to the hospital as well. So I had my OBGYN as well as my certified professional midwife there. And that midwife really helped to provide and ensure that I had a good experience. So I've had them. For my home birth that I just had with my newborn, I had a traditional granny midwife. And as I was explaining, in Georgia, these certified midwives can't attend home births anyway. So for the most part, I knew that my option was a naturopathic traditional granny midwife. And I had an amazing, beautiful experience with them. So to me, the midwife you pick really depends on you and your comfort level. So I knew that I wanted to have a home birth regardless, and in the state of Georgia, basically I wasn't going to be able to get a certified midwife, and I was completely fine getting a traditional granny midwife. If you're a person who, you're kind of on the fence about having a home birth, you're not sure if it's what you really want to do, you have some fear still, I would say probably look into a certified midwife, because that probably is going to make you feel a little bit better. You're going to feel like they've gone through a system, etc. What I would say is that you're still dealing with the issues of any system. So the same bad practices that you're going to get with the OBGYN who's gone through this anti-Black medical system are going to be some of the same issues that you're going to get with a probably certified midwife inherently, because they're still being trained by the same system. They still think that Black people have a higher pain tolerance, etc., etc. And so if you've been trained by that system, it's going to take a really strong person to be able to push back against those ideals. And inherently, you're going to end up still dealing with some of those biases from a medical system. But if it makes you feel more comfortable, you have two options for certified midwives: your certified nurse midwife and your certified professional midwife. So there's many, many options. And the certified nurse midwife is great for people who, let's say you want to have a hospital birth, you just don't want to go the OBGYN route, and you want somebody who's going to look at your care a little bit more holistically. Ding, perfect, right? You already know they can administer and do everything that a traditional doctor can do, and they're in the hospital setting with you, and you're getting some additional care. That's a perfect experience for you. Your certified professional midwife, they also have their certifications and what they need, but they can deliver at home. And then for folks who are really interested in preventative care, holistic care, making sure that mind, body, spirit is good, your granny midwife is going to be A1. So how do you find one of these midwives? One, you decide what kind of midwife you want of this list that I've just given, and you start doing your research, right? So you might start Googling in your area, certified nurse midwives in Georgia, certified nurse midwives in Maryland, wherever you live, and you kind of start getting a list of places. Usually, especially if you're Black, there might be some list or hub of places that already have a list of Black birth workers in your area, right? And so you can start calling through those places. And I would always say schedule an appointment. You have to. Do not just jump and go with anybody that you see. Please schedule a one-on-one consultation with them. And in that consultation, you need to make sure that you ask them tons of questions, right? What is their philosophy on different things? How do they operate in the space? What expectation can you have around how often you're meeting with them? So for example, with your OBGYN, if they're busy, you might meet with them often, but it might just be for quick little 10-minute meetings, where with your midwife, you might have hour-long meetings because they really want to get to know you. They really want to understand who you are, your partner, how you're operating in the space. And so it's super, super important to ask them, how often do we meet? How often are we having appointments? How long can I expect appointments to be? What can I expect of the appointments? Anything that might technically bother you. What do you do if I need to be transferred? What hospitals do you have relationships with? How long does it take for you to get to me? Do you have assistants, etc.? Any question that you might have, and I'm happy to, at some point, provide people a list of questions. If you guys want that, let me know in the comments. But do your consultation interview with them. It's so important. So you do that, and then you finally go and you choose your midwife and you start having your appointments with them. The second part of your package of what you need for like your birth care is your doula. And I think the doula experience really changes if you're doing a hospital birth versus a home birth. And I would say like the traditional doula, the person who's a doula is probably more trained in a traditional hospital birth setting. So in a hospital birth setting, your doula operates in two fashions. One as an advocate for you, and two as a support person in your birth. So by advocate, I mean, here's a person who can be a barrier between you and the hospital staff and stop them from like interrupting you in the middle of having contractions. What tends to happen with birthing people at most hospital settings is like the nurse or the doctors who are there, that's what they do all day long. So they're desensitized most of the time to people having contractions and like being in pain. And so when you're in the middle of a contraction, you don't want to be talking to anybody. And a lot of times these nurses and these doctors, because they don't care and they're used to it and they're desensitized, they're going to stop and interrupt you in the middle of a contraction, which is not gonna, it's just gonna agitate you as the birthing person, and it's not gonna be good for you to continue to progress so that you can have a safe and healthy labor. So your doula will be the interjection person and say, hi, excuse me for a second, the person is in the middle of a contraction, can you give us 10 minutes? Can you give us 5 minutes? Oh, can you leave the papers with me? I'll make sure that they sign them. Oh, can you tell me what this paper is for? I'll make sure that they read them. So it's really, really important that you have an opportunity to have the doula be the intermediary. And then the second way they're helpful is actually supporting the birthing person through contractions, doing some of the pain relief measures. So they either help with the partner, support the birthing person, or let's say you're not partnered and maybe it's your parent or your sibling or a friend who's also attending the birth with you. They will be like the second hand person to help support. And it's important in hospitals because let's say you're in the middle of a painful contraction and your family member or partner who's with you is like providing some support with the pain that you're feeling. So they're giving you counter pressure. While you want that counter pressure, and at the same time, you might also want ice. And you do not want that family member to leave your side to also get ice. So your doula is now interfacing with the hospital staff trying to figure out how to get ice for you, right? And so that is always really good to have an additional set of a person who can go and do some of those things and interact with the hospital staff, so you're not losing your partner or your family member from being in the hospital room with you when you're actually like going through contractions. And so I know that like COVID has impacted how many people can be in a hospital setting, but if you can have your main person, your family member or your partner, as well as your doula, 100% do it. I would say that a doula is also important if you don't have a family member or support person. So if you're a birthing person who's having a baby and you don't have another additional support person with you, then you should 100% hire a doula. And it's very important. And then in the home setting, the doula operates in the same way, but of course, because you've also chosen your midwife or maybe your free birthing, they don't have to do that interaction with the healthcare provider the same way that a doula would have to do if you're in a hospital setting, right? Because that midwife and that doula have already met. Maybe they have a pre-existing condition. They've come together for some of your appointments. They know what your needs are. And so it just flows very differently for a doula. For doulas, for finding your doula, you can find them the same exact way. Word of mouth and or Googling in and around your city area, wherever you live, to try to find someone who you really like and can be supportive to you. I would say if you have a family member who's recently done a doula training, or let's say you have a family member who who wants to do a doula training, maybe instead of paying a doula, maybe you pay for your family member to do a doula training, right? Because that might actually make more sense. The amount of money that you might shell out to have a doula, your sister or your cousin or your mom could be that full well-rounded person for you as well. And it might make sense to pay for them to do the training and support you and have all of the information versus you finding someone who is not a family member to attend your birth as well. So something to think about. The third person you need in your birth team is your lactation consultant. And this is if you're planning to nurse or pump, right? And so it's really, really important to have lactation consultant, especially if it's your first birth, because you're coming into it a lot of times with little or no information. And even if you do all your Googles and really dig deep and are watching all the YouTube videos and all the Instagram videos about how to latch, you and your child have never done it before together, right? And so it's important that you figure out what is the best and most optimal situation for me to ensure that my child can be fed if your plan is to nurse. And so they're going to give you tips and tricks for you. So for example, are you having a hard time nursing because your child actually has a lip tie? Well, many pediatricians don't know how to look for lip ties or tongue ties because they often are interacting with people who aren't nursing, because while breastfeeding is becoming more popular, there's still tons of people who don't, which is fine, but those pediatricians a lot of times aren't trained to look for them. So your lactation consultant will be a person who's able to see like, oh, your child actually has a lip tie and that's why they're having a hard time getting their mouth fully suctioned onto your breast. And here's what you can do. Here are your options then. They can also help you with different positions. And also, like, let's say you have larger breasts and they're drooping and they're heavy for the baby. They can give you little things like taking a towel and rolling it up and putting it under your breast and propping it to make it easier for your baby to latch onto. There's a whole host of like little tricks and tips that lactation consultants have. And so it's so important to find somebody to add to your birth team roster. So there's different ways this can look. There are lactation consultants who come into your home and do one-on-one trainings. And then there's also lactation consultants who do group trainings. I think one-on-one trainings in the home are amazing and you get that one-on-one care and attention, but getting a group training can also be interesting too, because a lot of the times people don't know what to ask because they don't know, right? And so when you're in a group setting, somebody else might have a question and you're like, damn, that's what's happening to me. I didn't even know. And so sometimes being in that group setting just provides that camaraderie and additional information that you probably wouldn't have been able to get on your own, and helps you to solve your own problems as well. So I often recommend, getting you a one-on-one session with a lactation consultant, A1, amazing. But if you can also get a group setting, that's also great. And there's also tons of resources. So the, best resource you can go to is La Leche League for lactation consultant, and I'll add the name here on the screen. And you can Google La Leche League in your city or your state, and 9 times out of 10, I promise you, they probably have an in-person meetup group somewhere near where you live. La Leche League is all around the globe, and they are like the premier lactation consultant groups. And most questions that you have, they can answer. If you don't have a meetup near you, you can also go into their Facebook group. And when I tell you, there's so much information. You can literally post a picture of like your child latching on your boob, and somebody there will answer your question and will help you out. So like there's so many opportunities and resources. And so if you don't actually have the dollars and cents to pay for a lactation consultant, the Leche League is free in most places, especially the meetup groups. And then there's also the Facebook group as well. And many insurances now also subsidize lactation consultants. So definitely look into that as well in your area. And then the last and maybe like sometimes most important piece of your birth team is your birth educator. So I would say, like, 1, if this is your first time ever having a baby, you need a birth educator. Or 2, if you have not had a child in a very long time, you should also do birth education. So you might say, like, okay, I know how to push. I don't need a birth educator. Yes, you do. What I think is most important about doing birth education is that, like, 1, it talks to you about like the prenatal phase, good nutrition, what to expect, how your body should be moving and progressing along. But then they go very, very, very deep into the actual labor process, explaining the different phases of labor, what you can expect at different points, how the contractions should look, when you should go to the hospital, if you want to labor at home for a while before you go to the hospital, what that looks like. If you're having a home birth, what you should consider. If you're at a hospital and they're telling you need Pitocin to induce your labor, what does that mean? What are the potential side effects of that? What else could happen? What is the cause and effect of making these choices? And so 1, if you're looking for a birth educator and you're also planning a home birth, I highly, 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 highly recommend you finding a birth educator who either 1, has also had a home birth, or 2, specializes in home birth, because inherently most birth education programs are more geared to people having hospital births. And so it's great to know that information, because there's always some likelihood that you could get transferred to a hospital because you have a complication during birth, or you decide the pain is not working for you, you want to get epidural. That can always happen. However, it's also important for you to know and get the correct information for somebody who's having a home birth. So What I always suggest for people is if you're considering a home birth, to actually look up and see if you have a Bradley educator in your area. People had issue with the Bradley education method for many reasons, mostly because it was founded by a white man, and inherently like men shouldn't be telling women about their birthing bodies, etc., etc. However, what I will say is that many birth educators who are women a lot of times have had home births. And so a lot of them have a lot of information about the techniques and the different things that you can think about and expect for a home birth setting if they've gone through the Bradley method. And so if you're looking for like a starting place for birth education, you know that you can look up Bradley method and at least get some very initial information about what your options are. But please like ensure that you have birth education in your back pocket for this. So we have our midwives, we have our doulas, our lactation consultant, and our birth educators. And those are the folks that you need. 100%. Please don't skimp out on any of those parts. I know that that means that you're talking and interviewing with a lot of people and doing a lot of, having a lot of conversations. But like, if you can ask your mom or your sister or your cousin or your partner to do some of those initial screeners and those phone calls, it helps out. If you send them the questions that you want to ask the people, they can do that work for you too. For me and my husband split a lot of this work both times. And honestly, he owned a lot of that work because again, I'm pregnant, tired, exhausted, etc. And so any way that you can utilize your community and your village to help out in that process, it's A1 important. And again, once you establish your birth team, if you know that you're gonna have subsequent births and more children, calling those folks back up again is always important. And what I will also say is every single time that I had used somebody and had them be a part of my birth team, they become a part of our family. And I've remained in contact and community with those folks. And I think it changes your village and it makes your village stronger and bigger and really gives you additional people to like bring into your life in a very beautiful way. And so I 100% believe that you should look up these people and add to your birth team. And so if you have any additional questions, I am so happy to answer them. So please leave them in the comments below. If you have any ideas for like additional videos that you want to see based on this topic, please let me know. And I hope that you have an amazing labor and birth experience and postpartum experience and that you're able to build the birth team of your dreams. See you later. Bye.